and Korea and Vietnam. Interestingly enough, in all three of these cases, the United States has fought wars with these countries in the last 100 years. Japan. Japan sits on the top of volcanic islands right here, and it consists of four main islands, of which I've written their names on a board. And again, when I've asked that question on the multiple choice test, I can't promise you it will be on your test. I mean, I can promise it's on a test, but I don't know if you'll get it or not. But somehow or another, a lot of my students wind up getting this question right. I don't know if all of you know, my second daughter is very much interested in Japan. But anyway, it consists of islands that are sitting on top of volcanoes. Essentially what happened, this area was once under the ocean, some volcanoes erupted, and they shot up these islands. So Japan's islands are sitting on they're made of volcanic ash. Now, fast forward to the present time, November 2014, and volcanoes are making news big time in two places in the world. Hawaii is one. Anybody recall the other one? There are two places around the globe where volcanoes are erupting. Iceland, thank you, yes. Iceland and Hawaii. Anyway, Hawaii is also on volcanic island. And Iceland is, I believe, if it's not all volcanic, a lot of it is. Now, somehow or another, folk, volcanic soil is extremely rich in minerals. And I'm not sure that we know why. I will say this. When the astronauts came back from the moon, and we tried to grow plants using moon dirt, the plants grew better with moon dirt than they would probably have using at least surface dirt on the earth. But somehow the moon is a better place to grow crops than the earth is if you can give them some water and maybe a few minerals they lack. If they lack any minerals at all. Volcano, deep underground volcanic ash, excellent to grow. However, Japan is not a good farmland, owing to the fact that it's mountainous. Until only 20% of the land is arable. That word arable can be added to your vocabulary. That means it's 20% of the land, or does your book say 12%? 20%, okay, it's suitable for cultivation, in other words, arable, suitable for cultivation. Now folks, the fact that they cannot farm, either cattle farming or chicken farming or wheat farming or any other kind of farming, meant that they had to resort to something else, and that's true even in the year 2014. They have farmers, yes, but they have to resort to some other way of making a living, and this has encouraged them to become manufacturers. And in fact, at one point, less than 80, 90 years ago, they had plans to just take over this whole region, but that's jumping ahead of the story a little bit, but they were going to convert themselves into a manufacturing region. Well, they lost their war, but they still have converted to manufacturing fairly well. Now, in the case of all three of these countries, they were all strongly influenced by China. Here's Japan, here's Korea, here's Vietnam. Close to China, and China being the big country, sometimes called the Middle Kingdom, with the most advanced civilization. And all three of these countries recognize the superiority of Chinese civilization, and all three of them copied China to some extent. And I want to say this about the Japanese. They are not the most inventive people on earth, but they are some of the world's best copiers. They can copy a product and improve upon it. They did not invent the automobile, but they can make good ones. And when I was at Lockheed, some Japanese men came to look at our machinery, and they would actually be wearing suits and ties and get under a dirty old machine and just peek up and take notes, went home and copied the machine and made a better one than we had, then sold it to us. We ran that machine for about 20 years during the time I was there, and then disassembled all of our machinery. But anyway, they're great copiers. All right. The first people we know of to move into Japan moved in sometime during the Christian era. In other words, since the birth of Christ. They were the Jomon. Some people believe the Jomon were very primitive people who made their living by food gathering and hunting and fishing. Others say no, they actually had mastered the technique of farming from the very beginning, and they actually were excellent farmers from the start. Initially, the Japanese people appear to have been somewhat primitive people. They have a creation myth. They said some god and some goddess married, and their offspring became the universe. Now, a lot of societies have had similar creation myths, but the Japanese are the only ones who have had this kind of myth who we could consider advanced people, and who continue to hold on to this myth even after they became an advanced society. Your book names the goddess. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but I'm looking at page 303 in the book, where they name the god and goddess. Again, sometime around it, well, your book gives different figures than I gave. Forget what I said about in the Christian era. Your book seems to say that human beings have occupied Japan for at least 100,000 years. But we don't know much about anyone who lived there before about 8,000 BCE. The Yayoi, let me see, Y-A-Y-O-I. We now know the Yayoi were descended from the Jomon, but they were the people from which most Japanese people today are descended. Anyway, some of the Japanese began to unite themselves. At first, they seemed to have been tribal people disunited. They began to unite themselves and form a central government. And from that time to this history, a lot of the political history of Japan has been going back and forth like a pendulum between a centralized state on the one hand and a scattered state on the other. Centralized on the one and scattered on the other. About 600 BCE, they set up the office of emperor. And Japan is the one and only country on earth that has had the same ruling family for the last 2,600 years. They've gone father and son, father and son. And there's two reasons for this. Number one is the emperor is looked on as being divine, which meant an ordinary Japanese cannot aspire to the office of emperor because ordinary Japanese know that they're mortal or they're not divine. I mean, of course, the Japanese emperors, they know that they do die. But the other reason for this, the Japanese built into their religion that their emperor was divine. So what they have done with their emperors that has prevented coups also is most of their emperors have been mere figureheads. They have not had any power, and the power has resided in some shogun who took over, or some prime minister, or in the case of World War II, a group of warlords. In fact, one of the reasons Japan was so slow in surrendering to the United States was the Japanese wanted us to guarantee that we would allow them to keep their emperor. They wanted to, whatever, because they count time from the accession of the emperor. Now, for instance, the present emperor took office in 1989, I believe that's right, which was 24 years ago. So this is like year number 24 on the Japanese calendar, the 24th year of the present emperor. The previous emperor got the throne when he was young, and he ruled for about 50 years. But they count time the way the ancients counted time, from the accession year of the emperor. In the third year of emperor so-and-so, in the second year of emperor thus and such. So for these reasons, they keep the same royal family, even though the emperor does not have a whole lot of power. Japan's climate is temperate. That means, unlike Vietnam, they have summer and winter, they have snow. Temperate climate is a climate where it's hot in the summertime, cold in the wintertime, with a in between the autumn and the spring. So they have seasons. The Japanese islands, though, are located along a major fault line, which means that they have frequent earthquakes. You know, a fault line is a place where two tectonic plates come together, and sometimes under pressure these fault lines will move. The most recent earthquake occurred in the year 2011, about 3.5 years ago. In 1923, there was another terrible earthquake, but they have had some really, really bad earthquakes down through their history. In the 2011 earthquake, the people actually had a 30-second warning. And that's about all that we can give with the present technology. But 30 seconds before the earthquake struck, some alarms went off indicating one was about to happen. But again, that's more than you used to get. It used to be earthquakes would strike without warning. But we are trying to predict them, but at least they had a 30-second, half-a-minute chance to either get out of the building they were in or get somewhere to a safe place. A big tidal wave came in. A tidal wave overran some of the nuclear plants. And this means that some of their soil is going to be radioactive for who knows how many scores of years. China has tried several times to conquer Japan, but never did. The strongest attempt was the attempts made by Kublai Khan. He made 2 attempts, both failed. All right. The Chinese introduced Buddhism into Japan. As you know, Buddhism started in India, and thanks to the trail that went here. Anyway, thanks to trade, Buddhism was to spread into China, and then it was to spread into Korea, and eventually spread into Japan. However, Buddhism did not make much headway inside Japan, owing to the fact that Japanese have generally been resistant to foreign religions. The word I was trying to think of, folks, was Silk Road. The Silk Road. Japan made, but what Buddhism forced the Japanese to do was to define what they believed, so they developed a religion called Shinto. Now, I want to say this about Shintoism. Throughout a lot of their history, the Japanese have been the least religious people on earth, and still are. So that's why a lot of people don't even know, well, what do the Japanese believe? And the answer is that typically they don't believe in a whole lot. However, one aspect of the religion, they believe the emperor is divine. Another is they believe in personal cleanliness. They like the tea ceremony. Let's see, divine emperor. Let's see, they have a few other, oh yeah, beauty, natural beauty. Around the homes of the wealthier Japanese folk, you'll see a whole lot of flower beds. They like to surround themselves with flower beds or try to bring out the natural beauty of the flowers. They do stress obedience to authority, particularly obedience to the emperor, even though throughout most of history they have simply looked down on their emperor as being a mere figurehead, and that's especially true after World War II. To try to maintain his status as a god, the emperor was like considered too holy to even appear on TV. And finally, for the first time in history, a Japanese emperor appeared on television after the big earthquake of the spring of 2011.
That was the first time ever?
First time ever, is what I understand.
2011.
2011, yeah. You don't have to write that down, but just to show you how the emperors maintained a separate existence from their own people and tried to become inaccessible to their own people, and this helped maintain their status as a divine person. Now, after World War II, part of the treaty that the United States made with Japan was the emperor was allowed to hold his office, still be called emperor, but he was to get up and publicly renounce his claim to divinity, which the last emperor did, the previous emperor. So supposedly they no longer regard the emperor as divine, even though some of the ordinary Japanese still do.